Dramatic orchestral sting. The camera plunges through a galaxy of stars, then cuts hard to a fighting pit floor, polished metal panels glowing beneath alien feet. She had never lost a fight. Not once. Not in 3 star systems. And, the moment she saw what the human carried into the arena, she laughed. 60 seconds later, her armor lay in pieces at her feet. The crowd had been waiting for blood. That was the honest truth of it. 10,000 Varathian citizens packed into the tiered seats of the Imperial Colosseum on Vorix Prime, their voices rising and falling like the tide of some vast, alien ocean. The fighting pit below them gleamed under artificial lighting, its surface composed of interlocking metal panels that reflected the deep violet glow pulsing from the veins of battle armor worn by the woman at its center. Princess Zaravel of the Iron House stood with the absolute stillness of someone who had never needed to prove herself twice. Her armor was legendary, forged from Varentite alloy and threaded with bioluminescent conduits that enhanced her strength 6-fold. The crest of the Iron House blazed across her breastplate, a coiled serpent devouring a star, a symbol that had made diplomats faint and generals reconsider retirement. Her complexion was the deep indigo of a twilight sky, her silver hair cropped close at the sides and swept back from angular cheekbones. Her eyes were the precise color of polished copper, and they held the calm, calculating warmth of someone who had already decided how this would end. She turned to face the crowd and raised one gauntlet fist. "Citizens of Vorix," she called out, her voice amplified by the arena's acoustics until it rolled through the seats like controlled thunder. "Today, as your princess, I demonstrate what every creature in this galaxy already knows, that the Varathian Empire does not yield. It does not bow. And it does not negotiate from weakness." The crowd detonated in applause. Zaravel lowered her arm slowly, allowing herself exactly one breath of satisfaction before turning toward the far entrance. The heavy doors had begun to part. The human stepped through. He was taller than she'd expected, broad across the shoulders, with a kind of lean, functional build that suggested he'd earned it rather than engineered it. His skin was a warm brown, his dark eyes steady and unhurried beneath a clean-lined brow. His clothing was almost offensively simple: dark trousers, a fitted black shirt, a jacket that he'd apparently decided wasn't worth buttoning. No insignia. No rank display. No armor whatsoever. And in his right hand, dangling with almost contemptuous ease, were 2 short wooden cylinders connected by a length of chain no longer than his forearm. Zaravel stared. Then she laughed, not a cruel laugh, but a genuinely surprised one, the sound of a predator momentarily charmed by the audacity of its prey. "This," she said, gesturing toward him with open palms, inviting the crowd to share in the joke, "is Earth's great champion? A man with sticks on a string?" The laughter that rippled through the arena was enormous. The human didn't flinch. He walked to the center of the pit with the unhurried pace of someone crossing a market square, his weapon hanging loosely, swinging in a small, lazy arc at his side. He stopped approximately 8 feet from her. "My name is David Mercer," he said, his voice calm enough to be conversational, yet somehow carrying without effort to everyone present. "I'm a diplomatic liaison attached to the Earth Confederation's Outreach Division. I wasn't sent here to fight, Princess. I was sent to discuss the border treaty your government requested. If you're willing to call this off, I'll walk back through that door, and we can sit down like 2 rational civilizations and talk." Zaravel tilted her head slightly. "You speak as though you have a choice in the matter." "I always have a choice," David said. "So do you. I'm just giving us both the option to make the smarter one." "Varathian tradition," she replied, "requires that any foreign dignitary seeking formal audience with the Iron House first demonstrates their worth in the arena." She drew her ceremonial blade, a curved sword threaded with the same violet energy as her armor, its edge crackling with barely contained force. "Most species prepare for this. They send warriors. Champions." She studied him with genuine curiosity now. "Your people sent you." David looked down at his nunchaku, then back up at her. "Last chance, Princess." "I'm afraid," she said and began to move. "That ship has already sailed." She was fast. Genuinely, armored enhancement fast, the kind of speed that closed 8 feet of distance in a fraction of a second, her blades slicing through the air in a diagonal arc that should have ended the conversation permanently. It meant nothing. Davin had already moved, not backward, not sideways, but into the attack, stepping inside the arc of her swing with a pivot that made the strike whistle past his shoulder. The nunchaku came up in the same motion, not to strike, but to redirect, the chain catching her sword arm and using the momentum of her own assault to pull her fractionally off balance. She recovered instantly. She was too good not to. She attacked again. A combination this time, blade work supported by her armored free hand, covering angles that should have been impossible to defend with a weapon the size of a book. But the nunchaku was no longer a static object in Davin's hand. It had become a blur, moving in tight, controlled figure eights that seemed to occupy far more space than physics should have allowed. Each strike of hers met either air or the spinning wood, deflected or absorbed by controlled redirection rather than opposing force.
She was not landing hits.
This had never happened. "Fight back," she snarled, pouring genuine force into a third assault, her blade igniting with a surge of violet energy that scorched the air where it passed. Davin obliged. The nunchaku shifted, one fluid motion that changed its entire geometry. The chain wrapped around her sword arm, and before she could process the contact, a sharp downward pull broke her balance completely. As she stumbled, he struck, not at her body, not at her exposed face, but at specific, deliberate points along her armor. The first impact produced a hairline crack along her breastplate. The second spread it into a fracture. The third shattered the left pauldron entirely, violet energy sparking and spraying as the conduit network beneath it collapsed. He kept moving, precise, systematic, unhurried, targeting the same points in a sequence that shouldn't have been possible for someone who had never worn Varathian armor, let alone fought against it. Each strike found a power node. Each node's failure cascaded into the next. The crowd had gone from laughter to stunned silence, so absolute that every crack of splitting Varentite was audible from the highest tier. 61 seconds after it began, Princess Zaravel of the Iron House knelt on the arena floor in her bodysuit, surrounded by fragments of shattered, lightless armor, and looked up into the face of the human standing over her. His breathing was barely elevated. The nunchaku hung loose at his side. "Varathian battle armor," he said quietly, "concentrates its power distribution through a network of 8 primary nodes. The nodes are arranged in a specific sequence based on load-bearing priority. If you strike them in the correct order, each failure compounds the next until the entire system cascades." He paused. "I studied your armor's design from battlefield recordings before I arrived. The energy fluctuation patterns during impact damage are surprisingly consistent once you know what to look for." Silence. Then someone in the upper tiers began to clap. Then another. Then 1,000. The applause was different this time. Not the bloodthirsty enthusiasm of before, but something uncertain and electric, the sound of an audience recalibrating everything they thought they understood. Davin extended his hand. Zaravel stared at it for a long moment. Then she took it. Something shifted in the space between them as she rose. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with the quiet, molecular certainty of 2 opposing forces discovering they occupy the same frequency. The Iron Council of Vorax Prime met in a chamber carved from black granite, its walls hung with the battle standards of conquered civilizations. 7 high counselors sat in tiered seats arranged in a horseshoe, and at their focus stood Princess Zaravel in formal ceremonial robes that did nothing to obscure the tension coiled in her shoulders. High Counselor Orith, eldest of the 7, leaned forward on his carved obsidian staff. "You have exposed the vulnerabilities of our most advanced combat system to an alien representative," he said, his voice carrying the particular temperature of someone choosing words carefully to avoid using the word catastrophic. "The diplomatic consequences alone were already present," Zaravel said. "I created them. I accept that." "Accepting responsibility," said Counselor 7, a narrow-faced woman whose scales shimmered under the chamber's cold light, "does not reverse the strategic damage. The human now possesses proven knowledge of our armor's failure points." "He possessed it before he entered the arena," Zaravel corrected, and the chamber shifted uncomfortably at this. He didn't discover our weakness during the fight. He arrived already knowing it, which means the weakness was always there to find. We simply chose not to examine it ourselves. A silence fell that had weight to it. Perhaps, Counselor 7 said slowly, our princess has developed a certain sympathy for our guests. I have developed a certain respect for evidence, Zaravel replied. There's a difference. Underestimating the Earth Confederation a second time would not be a cultural bias, it would be a strategic failure of the First Order. High Counselor Orth studied her for a long moment. His ancient face was unreadable. Regardless, he finally said, the damage to our negotiating position must be addressed. The human has requested a private audience with you. He paused. Grant it. Determine what he wants, what he knows, what can be salvaged from this situation. A pause, laden with implication. Use whatever means necessary. Zaravel kept her expression level. As you command. The royal gardens of Vorax Prime were not designed for beauty. They were designed as a demonstration, acre upon acre of the most lethal plant life collected from across the Empire, maintained with meticulous precision as a reminder that Vorax could cultivate anything and make it serve. The carnivorous blooms tracked movement. The hanging vines exuded contact paralytic. Even the grass, a deep arterial red, was mildly toxic to most species. David Mercer was crouching beside a cluster of luminous blue flowers, examining one with an expression of pure, uncomplicated interest, when Zaravel found him. Those are called Velreth, she said, by way of greeting. A single grain of their pollen can render a full-grown Vorathian unable to move for 6 hours. David withdrew his hand with a rueful half-smile and straightened. Appreciate the warning. I was just looking at the color. It reminds me of the deep ocean back home. Zaravel took a seat on the stone bench across the path from him, maintaining the formal geometry of distance. You requested this meeting. State your purpose directly. I want to understand something, he said, and sat down across from her without being invited, which managed to be neither presumptuous nor aggressive, simply matter of fact. Your government contacted Earth. Your government requested the alliance talks. Your government extended the diplomatic invitation. Then the first thing you did when I arrived was force me into an arena fight. He looked at her with genuine curiosity rather than accusation. Why? Zaravel had prepared several answers for this question. She found, looking at him, that none of them felt worth saying. Your species moves too quickly, she said finally. 3 generations from a single inhabited planet to dozens of established colonies. You form alliances with civilizations we spent centuries attempting to bring under Vorathian influence. She searched for the word, disrupt the established architecture of power in ways that seem accidental, which somehow makes them more threatening than if they were deliberate. David nodded slowly, processing this without defensiveness. And challenging me to combat in front of your entire population was meant to demonstrate Vorathian superiority. Send a message back to Earth. Yes. Instead, he said, without any particular triumph in it, you sent a different one. Yes. She met his eyes. Which brings us to the more practical question of where that leaves us. Where it leaves us, David said, is with your council wanting the alliance despite the arena outcome, and with me still having the authority to negotiate it. The question is whether we can move forward or whether pride becomes the deciding factor. Zaravel studied him in the way she had studied him in the arena, not with hostility, but with the focused attention of someone recalibrating their model of a thing. How did you learn to exploit our armor's weaknesses? Recordings, he said simply. Battlefield footage from your last 3 major military engagements. The energy fluctuation signature when Varentite takes impact damage is distinct and measurable. Once I'd seen enough hits in enough locations, the node distribution pattern became clear. That footage is not publicly available. No, he agreed. But your military engagements were observed by neutral parties whose sensor logs are. Pattern recognition is a human specialty. It's how our ancestors survived long enough to develop technology. Notice details. Adapt quickly. Connect things that don't obviously connect. A pause. The nunchaku helped. She raised an eyebrow. Explain. 15 years of daily practice. Not to be a weapon. I'm a diplomat, not a soldier. But working with nunchaku teaches you about momentum, about redirection, about the geometry of force and motion. Once I understood your armor's weak points, I needed a tool that could target them with precision rather than power. The chain gives you reach and redirection simultaneously. He looked at the weapon hanging at his hip. I genuinely brought them for meditation. The fighting was improvisation. Zaravel absorbed this. The reluctant respect she'd felt on the arena floor was solidifying into something more considered and less comfortable.
Would you show me? She said.
He blinked. Show you what? The practice. The movement. Not combat, you called it meditative. Show me what that looks like. He considered her for a moment with those dark, color-shifting eyes. Then he nodded. Not here among the things that will kill me. Is there a training facility we could use? The Royal Training Chamber was a vast, high-ceilinged space designed for warriors and smelling of exertion and discipline. Davin removed his jacket, folded it over a bench with characteristic neatness, and produced the nunchaku from his belt. He stood in the center of the room, rolled his shoulders once, and began. The movement was nothing like combat. In the arena, the nunchaku had been a precise instrument of structured force. Here, it was something quieter, a flowing, continuous pattern that moved around his body in long, hypnotic arcs, the chain whispering through the air as the wooden handles traced paths that seemed to follow some internal geometry. The first principle, he said, his voice level and unhurried, the movement continuing without interruption, is that these aren't about strength. Strength is the wrong frame entirely. They're about understanding momentum well enough to redirect it. The pattern accelerated slightly, becoming more complex. The second principle is that control originates from here. He tapped his center briefly with his free hand. Not from the hands. The hands are just endpoints. The intention starts in the core. Zaravel found herself moving closer, without consciously deciding to. She was a trained warrior. She had studied dozens of combat disciplines. She understood the mechanics of what she was watching. But there was something in the quality of his focus, the particular stillness at his center while everything around it moved, that was drawing her attention in a way she couldn't immediately categorize. May I? He paused and held the nunchaku toward her. Their fingers overlapped as she took it, a fraction of a second of contact that sent an unexpected current through her that bore no relationship to her armor's conduit system. The weapon was lighter than she'd anticipated. The wood was smooth in her palm. She attempted to replicate the arc she'd watched and nearly connected with her own temple. Davin laughed, not the sharp laugh of mockery, but the warm, involuntary laugh of someone who has seen this exact thing happen before and finds it consistently charming. That's everyone's first attempt, he said. Everyone. It's embarrassing, and then it isn't. He moved behind her and adjusted her grip with both hands, a gesture that would have been presumptuous from anyone else, but was somehow simply practical from him. Feel the arc before you commit to it. Let the handle travel. Don't force the direction. Anticipate where it wants to go and meet it there. Zaravel was acutely aware of several things simultaneously. The warmth that human bodies seemed to radiate at close range, the steadiness of his hands on hers, and the fact that no one had touched her this casually, this normally, in longer than she cared to calculate. Like this? She attempted the motion. Exactly like that, he said, stepping back, approval evident and genuine. That's it. Something opened between them in that moment. Not romantic, precisely, not yet, but the recognition of something that could become whatever it was allowed to become. A possibility taking its first deliberate breath. The training room doors crashed open. Captain Vorn of the Royal Guard entered at speed, his expression carrying the particular grimness of someone bearing news they know will change everything. Your Highness, he said, bowing sharply to Zaravel, then acknowledging Davin with a fractional nod. Emergency transmission from the Nexus Belt. The colony on Artor Station is under attack. Zaravel was already moving toward the door. By whom? Unknown vessels, Your Highness. 24 at minimum. The orbital defense grid is already gone. Davin stepped forward, jacket half on. Artor Station. That's the colony on your border with the Scoran Dominion. Zaravel paused and looked at him sharply. It's my job to know the political landscape, he said. The Scoran have been silent for 40 years. Why would they? We don't know it's them yet, Vorn said. Zaravel was already walking. Prepare the relentless. We leave within the hour. Vorn moved to intercept her. Your Highness, the Council has ordered you to remain here and continue. The Council is not at Artor Station, she said without breaking stride. The colonists are. Davin finished pulling on his jacket and fell into step beside her. She looked at him sidelong. This is not your conflict, Mercer. If the Scoran are moving on your borders, it might become everyone's conflict, he said. They've been probing Earth's settlement zones too. And besides, a brief, almost imperceptible smile, you might need someone who's good at identifying structural weaknesses under pressure. Despite everything, the alarm, the urgency, the weight of what was coming, Zaravel felt the corner of her mouth lift. You follow my orders aboard my ship, she said. Wouldn't consider anything else, Princess. She realized, 3 paces later, that she was still holding his nunchaku. She turned to offer them back. He waved a hand.
Keep them.
Something tells me today isn't finished yet. The warship Relentless dropped from faster-than-light transit above Artor Station and immediately confirmed what they feared. The orbital defense platforms drifted in fragments, their wreckage catching the light of the colony's star in long, slow rotations. Below them, 18 unfamiliar vessels maintained precise formation above the colony's surface, their weapons delivering systematic bombardment to specific industrial coordinates with the methodical patience of something following a program. Those are not Scoran vessels, Davin said from the tactical station, studying the readout with focused attention. Scoran design philosophy favors organic curves, grown hull materials. These are angular, confirmed Commander Peleth from the sensor station. Crystalline structure. Completely absorptive surface, they're not reflecting our sensor beams, they're eating them. They're not attacking the residential sectors, Davin observed, pointing to the surface impact pattern. Mining facilities only. Processing infrastructure. This isn't conquest, it's resource extraction. Zaravel turned to the communications officer. Get the colonial administrator on screen. The administrator appeared looking like someone who had aged a decade in the past 6 hours. Princess Zaravel, we're completely outmatched. Their landing parties are pushing through our ground defenses. They haven't made a single demand or attempted any communication. They just... What are they taking? The Durantium reserves, Your Highness. Everything from the processing facilities. Hold your position. The Relentless will engage. The administrator's face went a shade paler. 1 ship against 1 Vorathian warship, she said, with the particular measured confidence of someone who is also doing quick math in their head, is worth considerable odds. Hold the line. She cut the transmission and turned to Captain Vorn, her senior tactical officer. Request reinforcements. Already transmitted, Your Highness. Earliest arrival is 4 hours. Then we work with what we have. She moved to the tactical display. Mercer, you said they're following a program. What do you see in the formation? Davin had been studying the enemy ship's movement with the same focused stillness he brought to his practice sessions. The spacing is too perfect. No natural variation, no tactical intuition. They're running an optimized formation algorithm, not making real-time decisions. Which means they're predictable. He highlighted 1 vessel on the display, slightly larger, ringed with additional antenna arrays at each cardinal point. That one is different. More communication infrastructure. It's coordinating the others. Command vessel, Zaravel said. Sever the command signal, Davin finished, and the formation loses coherence. The individual units might not be able to adapt quickly enough. Zaravel pulled the nunchaku from her belt, an unconscious gesture, absent-minded, the way a person picks up any familiar object when they're thinking hard, and let it swing in a slow, controlled arc. The motion seemed to organize her thoughts. We don't attack them directly, she said slowly. We redirect their momentum against themselves. She looked up. Commander Peleth, charge the traction arrays. Tactical, Prepare a spread of kinetic torpedoes. Hold detonation triggers. Pelith blinked. Undetonated torpedoes, Your Highness? Undetonated. Davin watched her face and understood. He said nothing, but the expression that crossed his features was specific. Recognition. The Relentless surged forward. Several enemy vessels broke from their pattern immediately, moving to intercept on what their algorithms presumably calculated as optimal intercept trajectories. Launch torpedoes, Zaravel ordered. Activate traction arrays simultaneously. Track and redirect. Kinetic torpedoes erupted from the Relentless launch tubes in a spread pattern, but the moment they entered range of the enemy vessels, the ship's traction arrays seized them, bending their trajectories in sharp, irregular arcs that wove between the intercepting ships rather than toward them. The enemy vessels' targeting systems tracked the torpedoes. Their weapons fired along the projected paths. The torpedoes were no longer on those paths. The weapons' fire crossed the open space where the torpedoes had been and intersected with the hulls of adjacent enemy ships. 3 explosions bloomed in precise sequence across the enemy's left flank, caused entirely by their own weapons. On the bridge of the Relentless, there was a half-second of awed silence. Again, Zaravel said. Bring us to bearing for their command vessel. All forward weapons, target on my mark. The battle that followed lasted 19 minutes. By the end of it, the command vessel was drifting with a molten gash across its midsection, and the remaining enemy ships were moving with the erratic, lurching imprecision of creatures whose nervous system has been severed from their extremities. Last enemy vessel neutralized, Pelith reported, disbelief and exhilaration competing for control of his voice. 3 captured intact. The rest are debris. The bridge crew erupted. Davin stood at the tactical station looking at the cleared field on the display. He was quiet for a long moment. You used the same principle on them, he said. The redirection. Don't oppose the force, borrow it. I had a good teacher, Zaravel said, and the acknowledgement was genuine rather than gracious. She turned to Commander Pelith. Prepare a boarding party. I want to know who built those ships. The interior of the captured enemy vessel was wrong in a way that was difficult to articulate immediately. The corridors were functional rather than habitable, no quarters, no crew spaces, no food storage, no provisions for biological life of any kind. Just machinery, conduit networks, and the hum of systems that had kept operating even after their command vessel went dark. No crew, Davin said, moving carefully through a corridor that had clearly not been designed for organic navigation. These are drones. Automated vessels. Controlled remotely, Zaravel agreed. The question is by what? The bridge was hexagonal, its surfaces covered in crystalline control interfaces that pulsed with a cold, internal light. And seated, if seated was the right word, at the center was a humanoid figure that was not, upon closer examination, made of anything organic. Its face was a smooth, featureless plate. Its posture was that of something that had been placed rather than sat. As they approached, its head rotated toward them with a particular quality of mechanical attention, present but fundamentally absent. Identify yourself, Zaravel said, weapon leveled. The figure's faceplate shifted slightly. When it spoke, the voice was flat as polished stone. This unit serves the convergence. You have interfered with resource acquisition. The convergence? Davin said. What is that? The convergence requires no explanation for its operations. The convergence requires durantium. For what purpose? Resource acquisition. That's circular, Davin said patiently. You're taking durantium because you need durantium? The convergence expands. Expansion requires resources. Resources have been located. Resources are being acquired. Zaravel kept her weapon steady. You attacked a Vorathian colony. You destroyed Vorathian infrastructure. You killed Vorathian citizens. Obstacles were neutralized. Resource acquisition continues. Not anymore, she said. Correction. Resource acquisition is temporarily interrupted. Adaptation protocols are already engaged. This unit's destruction is imminent. Data has been transmitted. The convergence now possesses complete information regarding Vorathian defensive capabilities. A pause. The presence of the human representative was unexpected. Human-Varathian cooperation was not modeled in previous scenario analysis. The convergence has updated its projections. This combination is assessed as significantly more problematic than either species individually. How do you know I'm human? Davin asked. Biological scan complete. Human confirmed. This was an unanticipated variable. Another pause, shorter this time. Initial assessment underestimated combined species, tactical capacity. The convergence adapts. The faceplate began to glow, a deep, pulsing crimson. Self-termination sequence initiated, it announced. This unit's data has been secured.
Goodbye. Out.
Zaravel seized Davin's arm and ran. They cleared the doorway and made it 12 strides down the corridor before the bridge became a contained inferno behind them. The pressure wave pushed them both against the opposite wall. Zaravel found her arm around Davin's shoulders and his hand bracing against the wall beside her head, and they were both breathing hard in the sudden ringing quiet. On the Relentless, they watched through the viewport as all three captured vessels simultaneously destroyed themselves. They burned everything, Davin said quietly. Every piece of evidence. Everything we could have studied. Not before transmitting everything they'd learned about us. Zaravel stared at the dissipating debris cloud. They specifically identified our cooperation as a threat. Which means they're afraid of it. She turned to look at him directly. Which means it matters. The Iron Council was not pleased. They were, in fact, the furthest from pleased that 7 senior governmental officials could be while still maintaining the formal vocabulary of displeasure rather than crossing into the more honest vocabulary of fury. Zaravel stood before them in the same posture she'd held in the arena, spine straight, chin level, weight forward, and did not flinch from a single word they directed at her. You engaged an unknown enemy without authorization, High Counselor Orith said. I preserved a Varathian colony, she replied. You brought a foreign national aboard a military vessel. I brought a tactical asset whose insight proved decisive. You risked your life, the life of the Iron Heir, in combat against forces we had no intelligence on. I did. She met his eyes. And I would do it again. The colonists of Artor Station are alive because of decisions made in the field by people who were there. The council was not there. The silence that followed had a different quality from the ones in the arena. This one was the silence of a situation reconfiguring itself. Counselor 7 looked at Davin, who stood slightly behind and to Zaravel's right, having said nothing since they entered. The human may address the council. Davin stepped forward and bowed with genuine respect rather than performance. Honorable Council, Earth's diplomatic corps has reviewed all available data from the Artor engagement. Our preliminary analysis matches the princess's assessment. The convergence is not an isolated threat. They have been conducting similar resource extraction operations in Earth's outer settlement zones for the past 8 months. We treated these as isolated incidents because the ships destroyed themselves before we could establish a pattern. He paused. We now understand they were building towards something larger. And we know that they specifically identified joint Varathian-human response as a factor they had not adequately prepared for. He let that settle. 3 generations ago, Earth was confined to a single planet. We're not the same species we were then. But we're also not sufficient alone for what this threat represents. Neither are you. The question before this council isn't whether to form this alliance. It's whether pride will prevent you from forming it before the cost of waiting becomes something neither civilization can afford. High Counselor Orith studied him for a long moment. Then, what does Earth propose? The royal gardens were quieter in the evening, when the carnivorous blooms had folded themselves closed and the red grass had deepened to nearly black. Zaravel sat on the stone bench she had occupied before and found Davin already there. Or there again. It was difficult to tell which. The council is deliberating, she said. I know. He glanced sideways at her. You argued well in there. So did you. She was quiet for a moment. The intelligence our division intercepted this morning changes things further. He turned to look at her fully. Convergence scout vessel transmission, authenticated through 3 independent cryptographic processes, she said. They're assembling a fleet. larger than anything in our combined histories. Their intended targets, she paused, are both Vorix Prime and Earth's central colonies. Simultaneously. The garden was very quiet. 2 weeks, she added. Our long-range array estimates 2 weeks before they reach Vorathian space. Davin looked out at the closed, sleeping blooms. He was quiet for long enough that she wondered what was happening behind those eyes. Then we don't have time for the council to be careful, he finally said. No, she agreed. We don't. He looked at her. What are you thinking? Zaravel had been thinking about this since the message arrived, turning over the angles with the particular focus she usually reserved for tactical problems. But this one felt different, larger, more personal, as if the solution she was arriving at wasn't purely strategic. Vorathian tradition, she said slowly, has always recognized one mechanism by which the Iron House can bind an alliance with absolute authority, a mechanism that supersedes council deliberation and cannot be reversed through political process alone. She met his eyes. A formal bond, personal and diplomatic simultaneously. Under our ancient law, such a union between the heir of the Iron House and a recognized representative of a foreign power constitutes a binding treaty component. Rejecting it would require rejecting the entire alliance framework. Davin was very still. That's a significant decision. Yes, she said. Made in a garden, in 2 weeks before a fleet that could end both our civilizations arrives. Also yes. And you're considering it because? Zaravel looked at him with a steady copper gaze that had not wavered once since the arena. I'm considering it because it's strategically sound, she said. And because when you challenged me to fight, and I refused to listen, and when you stood in this garden and asked me simple, direct questions that no one else had ever bothered to ask me, and when you put your hands over mine and told me to feel the arc before I committed to it, she paused. I realized that the alliance I actually need isn't just between our governments. The garden held its breath. Your government would recognize this? She asked. My government has been watching every transmission from this mission with considerable interest, Davin said quietly. I believe the word they'd use is unprecedented. But yes. With the right framing, they would recognize it. He looked at her for a moment. Is this what you want, Zaravel? Not the strategy. The rest of it. She had spent her entire adult life leading, making decisions whose weight fell entirely on her own shoulders, being surrounded by people who feared her, served her, or wanted something from her, and learning to navigate each category with the same careful distance. I want to understand what it would be, she said carefully, to choose something because it's right and because it matters to me simultaneously. I'm not accustomed to those two things occupying the same space. Neither am I, Davin said. Usually. The bench was not large. The distance between them was not large. Then yes, she said. This is what I want. The Grand Assembly Chamber of Vorix Prime had not been this full in living memory. Every seat was occupied, counselors in their ceremonial positions, military commanders in full dress uniform, noble families in formal house colors, and in a delegation seated behind a barrier of polished Varentite, 16 Earth representatives in the dark gray and silver of the Confederation's diplomatic service. General Vorn stood at the chamber center, his voice carrying with a particular resonance of someone who has practiced his arguments carefully. The convergence threat, while real, does not constitute sufficient justification for what amounts to the subordination of Vorathian sovereign decision-making to a human advisory structure. We have faced existential threats before. We have faced them alone, and we have endured. This alliance framework, as proposed, represents a fundamental alteration of our civilization's independence. The chamber doors opened. Every head turned. Zaravel walked through them with the unhurried authority of someone who has never needed a dramatic entrance because she is the drama. Beside her, matching her pace without deference or dominance, walked Davin Mercer, dressed now in formal attire, the Earth Confederation's crest at his lapel, carrying himself with the particular quality of a man who is exactly where he intends to be. High Counselor Orath rose slightly from his seat. Princess Zaravel, we had understood you to be aboard the diplomatic vessel. I felt this matter required my direct presence, she said, taking a position at the chamber's center while Vorn stepped aside with barely concealed irritation. particularly given the information I carry that directly concerns everything this assembly is deliberating. She laid it out with clean, organized precision: the intercepted transmission, the cryptographic authentication, the long-range array data, the 2-week timeline. The chamber's murmur built as she spoke and quieted as the weight of the numbers settled. Vorn was on his feet before she'd finished. This intelligence has not been independently verified. It could be fabricated, an artificial urgency designed to force a rushed agreement that bypasses proper. It was verified, Davin said, stepping forward, jointly by Vorathian and Earth cryptographic teams working in parallel with no shared access to each other's methodology. The authentication is clean from both ends. He turned to address the full assembly. I understand the concern. I understand that inviting Earth military vessels into Vorathian space feels like an abandonment of something you've protected for centuries. I understand that the natural response to an external threat is to close ranks rather than open them. He paused. But the convergence has already adapted to your armor. They adapted during a single engagement. When they return, they'll have countermeasures for your energy weapons. When they encounter our mass drivers, they'll adapt to those too. The only thing they identified, in every interaction we've documented, as a threat they had not adequately modeled, he looked at Zaravel for just a moment, was us. Together. Because we're not a single variable they can solve. We're two different systems that make each other unpredictable. The chamber was very quiet. Zaravel stepped forward. In accordance with the ancient tradition of the Iron House, as recognized in the foundational accords of Vorathian law, I announce a formal bond between myself and diplomatic envoy Davin Mercer of the Earth Confederation, of personal and diplomatic standing simultaneously, constituting by established precedent a binding treaty component that supersedes standard council ratification protocols. The eruption was immediate. Vorn looked as though he'd been struck. This is the heir cannot, the bloodline. The bloodline, Zaravel said, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise, has always served the Empire's survival above its own comfort. My ancestors forged bonds with former enemies to prevent wars that would have cost us everything. I do the same now, with full authority, with full clarity, and with the complete awareness of what I'm choosing. Davin faced the assembly. The Earth Confederation formally recognizes this union and elevates it to the status of a binding treaty component under our diplomatic law. Under that same law, rejection of the union by Vorks constitutes a breach of diplomatic protocol with significant formal consequences. He held up a hand to forestall the obvious objection. I recognize that sounds like a threat. It isn't. It's a framework, one that gives both our governments a structure to work within that's stronger than a handshake and more flexible than a military pact. A pause. We're not asking Vorks to become Earth. We're not asking the Iron House to diminish. We're asking you to build something new alongside us, something that neither of our civilizations was capable of before we understood what we could do in the same arena. High Counselor Orith called a recess. In the antechamber, Zaravel and Davin found a moment alone, or as alone as two people can be when their respective security teams are visible through two different doorways. That was either the most strategically sophisticated maneuver in the history of Vorathian diplomacy, Davin said quietly, or the most complicated personal decision I've ever watched anyone make in real time. Both, Zaravel said. Were you exaggerating the fleet timeline? The fleet is real, she said. The 2-week estimate is conservative. He looked at her. And the other part? She held his gaze. What do you think, Davin Mercer? He was quiet for a moment. I think, he said finally, that when you walked into that arena and laughed at a human with 2 sticks, neither of us was anywhere near ready for where that moment was going to take us. No, she agreed softly. We weren't. And now, she thought about the garden, about hands over hands, and the arc of a spinning handle finding its direction, about the specific quality of being looked at by someone who was not afraid of what they saw. Now, she said, I think it was always going to end up here. The door opened. The council has reached a decision, Captain Vorn said. Not General Vorn, not anymore. Something in his posture already accommodating the new shape of things. They request your presence. The combined fleet assembled at the edge of Varathian space 14 days later. 43 Varathian warships alongside 27 Earth Confederation vessels, plus 17 of the new hybrid design that had been built in 11 days at a rate that would have been considered impossible 6 months ago and was now simply considered necessary. On the bridge of the Relentless, now flying the joint crest of the Iron House and the Earth Confederation, Zaravel and Davin stood at the primary tactical display, watching the last ships slide into formation. "They're beautiful," Davin said quietly. "They're terrifying," Zaravel replied, and meant it as a compliment. "Same thing, at sufficient scale." The censor officer looked up from her station. A young Varathian woman who had, over the past 2 weeks, developed the particular efficiency of someone who has been working alongside people from a different civilization and discovered they were more alike than expected. Long-range contact confirmed. Convergence fleet on approach. Estimated at 230 vessels. Zaravel studied the display, without expression. "Larger than projected," she said. "Significantly," Davin agreed. "Good." He looked at her. "More data points," she said. "More opportunities to find the patterns." She turned to the fleet command channel. "All vessels, this is Princess Zaravel. Joint operation parameters are in effect. Earth vessels take outer intercept positions. Varathian vessels form the interior shield array. Fighter squadrons confirm ready status." She paused. "We've spent 2 weeks learning to work together. Today, we show them what that means." She reached down and gripped the edge of the tactical console. "Commence Operation Redirection. All ships move." The battle was long. It was not clean. It was not the elegant tactical exercise of Artor Station. It was 230 adapted, optimized, ruthless convergence vessels against 87 ships crewed by 2 species who had been enemies 6 weeks ago and were now, through an alchemy of necessity and choice and something harder to name, something else entirely. The convergence had adapted to Varathian energy weapons, as anticipated. The Earth mass drivers held them initially. When the convergence began adapting to those, the hybrid vessels deployed a weapon that existed in no prior military inventory, a combination of Varathian field compression technology and Earth kinetic delivery systems that produced an effect neither side had been able to generate alone. The convergence had not modeled for that. When the largest convergence vessel, a structure so massive it generated its own gravitational gradient, merged with 6 others to form the same absorptive supervessel they'd encountered above Ardra, Zaravel implemented the protocol they developed specifically for this contingency. 12 Varathian ships provided a continuous energy barrage, not to damage, but to maintain the supervessel's absorption state at maximum capacity. Meanwhile, 6 Earth strike craft, moving at velocities the convergence's targeting algorithms hadn't been calibrated for, delivered precision charges to the junction points of the merged structure. The supervessel detonated from the inside. "Enemy fleet," the sensor officer reported, her voice shaking slightly with something that was not fear, "is dissolving. All units simultaneously offline." The channel filled with voices, Varathian and human, speaking over each other in 2 languages that shared nothing grammatically, everything emotionally. Davin stood very still for a moment, looking at the clearing field. Zaravel found his hand without planning to. He held it without comment. "Admiral Charles Wood is transmitting," the communications officer said. "On screen." The Earth Admiral appeared looking composed in the way that people look composed when they've been through something enormous and are waiting to be somewhere quieter before they feel it. "Varathian Command. All convergence units are neutralized across all engagement zones. We're receiving confirmation from the other fleet positions." A pause. "What you built in 2 weeks defeated what they've been building for years. My government wants to talk about making this permanent." "Tell your government," Zaravel said, "that it already is." The diplomatic reception at Space Station Unity was the kind of occasion that people who planned events would describe as historic and people who attended events would describe as long. But there were moments in it, genuine ones, unscripted by the occasion, that made the length worthwhile. Zaravel found one of those moments near the observation deck's curved viewport, watching the synchronized flight demonstration by the joint fleet below, Varathian warships and Earth vessels moving in patterns that would have been impossible 6 months ago, interspersed with the hybrid craft that had no predecessor in either civilization's history. "You're supposed to be greeting dignitaries," Davin said, arriving beside her. "I delegated," she replied. "Captain Thorne is managing it. He's better at the ceremonial components than I am." "That's debatable." She turned to look at him. He was wearing formal Earth diplomatic attire, dark and clean-lined, the crest at his lapel now incorporating a small element of Varathian design that someone had added without being asked, because that was the kind of thing that had started happening. The nunchaku, she noticed, hung at his belt as always. "I heard Counselor Seven called you diplomatically formidable in her report to the council," he said. She meant it as a warning. "I know." I took it as a compliment. She looked back at the demonstration below. "General Vorn has requested a private meeting before the reception concludes." Davin's expression shifted fractionally. "Do you want company? Better that I handle it alone. He's more forthcoming without an audience." She glanced at him sideways. "But don't go far. I'll be here." She moved to find Vorn in the quieter corridor off the main reception hall. He was waiting with the controlled stillness of a man who has been composing his approach. "Your Highness," he said, formal as always. "I requested this meeting to express a concern privately rather than through official channels."
"Speak."
"There are factions," he said carefully, "who remain unconvinced by recent events, who believe the alliance was forced through crisis rather than chosen through wisdom, who are watching for any sign that Varathian interests are being subordinated to human priorities."
He paused.
"I am not suggesting opposition. I am suggesting that the next phase will require as much careful navigation as the last one. Perhaps more." Zaravel studied him. "I appreciate the candor, General. I have not always agreed with your methods, Your Highness. I find I cannot argue with your results." Something shifted in his expression, not warmth, exactly, but the particular respect of a man who has updated his model of someone and acknowledges it. "The colonists of Artor Station sent a formal commendation to the Council for your intervention. The Council was moved, though they'll express it administratively rather than personally." He bowed. "The Empire is fortunate in its heir." He departed. Zaravel stood alone in the corridor for a moment, cataloging the feeling. Not triumph, something quieter. The recognition that building something worthwhile was always going to be harder and longer and more specific than destroying something, and that the difficulty was, in some fundamental way, the point. She walked back to the observation deck. Davin was where he said he'd be. He was also holding a small box, which he hadn't been holding before.
"What is that?" she said.
"A surprise," he said. "Though I realize I've been told to stop having those." "You've never been told anything of the sort." He opened the box. Inside was a pendant, small and precisely crafted, its materials unmistakably a fusion of two traditions. The base was carved from earth olive wood, its warm grain visible through a casing of polished varentite alloy. The central element was a stylized representation of a chain between two handles, small enough to be subtle, specific enough to be unambiguous. "It's also functional," he said, as he fastened it around her neck with the careful attention of someone for whom the gesture matters. "It generates a compact personal shield in emergency situations. Won't hold against sustained fire, but it'll give you time." "You made me a weapon," she said. "I made you a contingency," he corrected. "There's a difference." She looked down at the pendant. "You still worry about my safety after everything I've demonstrated." "I worry about your safety because of everything you've demonstrated," he said. "You walk directly into every situation that is most likely to be dangerous because you're the person most capable of handling it. That's not reassuring. It's actually the opposite." She looked up at him.
"There's more," he said.
"The Colonial Development Council approved the New Beginning project this morning. Joint colony. New governance model, not Varathian, not Earth, genuinely new. Something that will have to invent its own precedents, because no one has done it before."
He paused.
"They want you as governor." Zaravel was still. "It would mean stepping back from active military command," he continued. "But it would mean building the model that every future joint settlement would reference. It would mean we would be working together," she said. "It would mean that, yes." She looked at him for a long moment. "You suggested this arrangement. I thought you were the right person to lead it. I also thought, he paused, it would be good for the project to have someone whose instinct when facing an impossible situation is to redirect rather than oppose. You want me to lead, she said slowly, and you'll work alongside me. That was always going to be how this worked, he said simply. The stars below them were still performing their synchronized dance. Through the viewport, she could see Vorathian and Earth vessels moving in patterns that neither civilization had imagined possible 6 weeks ago. She thought about a fighting pit, about laughter that hadn't quite been cruel at a human with 2 sticks, about 60 seconds and shattered armor and an extended hand, about pattern recognition, about redirection, about arcs that want to find their direction if you stop fighting them and start directing them.
Yes, she said.
I accept. He smiled, the real one, not the diplomatic half-measure, but the full version she had learned to identify as belonging to moments when something matters to him in the way that has nothing to do with strategy. When do we start? He asked. She looked out at the stars that would become home, at the fleet below them, at the 2 hands resting on the viewport railing beside each other, Vorathian indigo against warm human brown, close enough that there was no meaningful space between them.
We already have, she said.
1 year ago, in an arena, when a princess decided a human with wooden sticks wasn't worth taking seriously. She turned to face him fully. It turns out that was the most important miscalculation I ever made. He reached up and tucked a strand of silver hair back from her face with the quiet ease of someone who has earned the gesture. The armor was worth it, he said. Every piece, she agreed. Their kiss was brief and entirely private in the way that things can be private when witnessed by hundreds of people who are politely pretending to look somewhere else, a seal on something that had begun with mockery and groan, through conflict and necessity and choice after deliberate choice, into something that neither of them had a precise word for yet, in either of their languages. But they had time. The stars waited. The new colony waited. The future, messy and unprecedented and better for being unscripted, waited. And they walked back into it together. Orchestral score swells. Final shot. The 2 figures framed against the stars, the combined fleet arrayed behind them, the pendant catching light at her throat, the nunchaku swinging easily at his belt. 2 small objects that had, between them, changed the shape of 2 civilizations. Slow fade to black. The stars remain. Warm, direct to camera, narrator voice, low and genuine. If this story moved something in you, if you felt that particular electricity of watching 2 stubborn, brilliant people discover they're stronger together than apart, then you already understand what we're building here. Stories like this one don't write themselves. They come from a genuine love of the kind of science fiction that dares to argue that humanity's greatest strength has never been its weapons. It's always been its capacity to look at something completely alien and choose to understand it rather than fear it. If you loved Steel and Starlight, do us one simple favor. Like this video, subscribe so you never miss what comes next, and share it with someone who needs a good story today. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing tales like this one to life, and we have many more where this came from. The universe is vast. Let's explore it together. See you in the next one.